Hello mate, and welcome to another exciting Ren'Py Masterclass. Now we're nearing the end of this video series already. Yes, believe it or not, you are already skilled enough to write your own visual novels, but we're going to go a little bit deeper in this video and we're going to look at animation and transform language. Now I know a number of you have probably been waiting with bated breath for this video, so without further ado, let's jump on into it. So we've got our code open here in Atom, and we can find some animation and transform language already existing within our code if we look for it. But let's just break down the differences between transforms and transitions for a start. Okay, so a transition and a transform both use animation and transform language to accomplish their goals. The difference between the two is that a transform is something that can be persistent on the screen. So for example, you can place an image on the screen at a certain position or at a certain transform, and then whatever properties that transform has will continuously be applied to that image or that displayable as long as it is actually on the screen. Whereas a transition is used to bring an image onto the screen or to take the image away from the screen and then to end there basically. So whilst there may be interchangeable functionality there, it's generally a good idea if you want to use these things to try and make sure that you get these down nice and tight. So let's just go straight into our script file, and we can see here what we've currently got is a menu which does some blah 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 stuff, and then we've got show Eileen happy, and we've got scene BG room. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just add a random image of just like a square or a circle or something into my code so that we can actually use that to demonstrate the ability of the transform language. So all I have done is I've created a rectangle shape that I've copied into the images folder. It's saved as a PNG file so that we can use it as much as we want to. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm simply going to create a transform, and I'm just going to call it temp trans. Okay, like that. Now anytime I call that transform, I will use temp trans as our name for it. So all I'm going to do to start with is I'm just going to give it a position. So I'm going to start off by declaring the anchor, and I want anchor to be 0.5, 0.5, which means that the coordinates that I give the X and Y position for this object will actually refer to the middle of the object, halfway across, halfway down, 0.5, 0.5, instead of the top left hand corner. This just means that putting something in the center of the screen can be a little bit simpler whilst still using our XY coordinates. Now we're going to say pause, and then we can just say, I don't know, I think I'm working on a 1920 by 1080p, so 1920 is 960 divided by 540, and then we can hit save. And now if I want to, I'm just going to get rid of that, and I'm instead going to say blank underscore image, which is the image that I've added to my Ren'Py code. In fact, let me just hide my face so that you can see the whole screen. And we're going to say at, and then temp underscore trans. Save our script. And now as you can see, at the exact center of the screen in both the XY position is our rectangle. It's following the transform as intended. Now we can add some adjustments to this. We can actually make this transform do something over time. So for example, if I wanted my let's make it, we want to make it look like it's spinning around the vertical axis. Okay, so let's just do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say my X zoom is 1.0, and then I'm going to say linear, which is the time interpolation. It's basically how I want the thing that I'm about to tell it to do, how I want it to do it. You can use ease in, you can use ease out. There are a number of different ways that you can do it, but linear just means it's going to go from where it is to where I want it to be at the same speed from start to finish, linearly. Okay, and then I'm going to say X zoom, and I want it to, we have to give it a time. Let's say we want it to happen over 2 seconds, and I want my X zoom to change to -1.0. Then I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to paste it, and we want it to do that. So now we're saying we want it to be linearly moving between basically the right way around and the wrong way around, and then we have to put a repeat in there to make it actually repeat. And now you can see that it's growing and shrinking like that. Now this doesn't look like it's spinning particularly because of the movement that we've got going here, because we've got it going linearly. But if I was to perhaps use ease in or ease out, let's try ease in. That's meant to be an E there if I remember correctly. We'll soon find out if it crashes. And then as you can see, because we've used in and out now, it actually looks like it's spinning a little bit better because it's spinning at what it's doing, what it's meant to be doing. Now obviously, ideally we'd have it ease in and ease out so that it would be not accelerating away. But you know, it's a step in the right direction. Okay. Now there are things that we can do with ATL as well, that we can actually change the way that this object reacts in such a way that if, for example, we were hovering over it or something like that with the mouse, it might react. And we can use that for any displayable, which means we can use it for buttons or text or whatever. So it's a really handy tool to have, because we can add sort of false animations or little mini animations on the screen that will enable us to create some cool visual effects. So if I go ahead and close this down, so we're going to create our own screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file. Just going to go straight into the game directory. We're going to go new file. I'm going to go temp screen.rpy. We'll just call it whatever. And then we're going to declare our screen, and we're going to call it temp screen, like that. So just call it as screen, temp screen. Nice and simple. So all I'm going to do in this screen is I'm going to add an image button like that. And then we can set, in fact, even better, I'm going to say button, and then I can have a background if I want to, and I'm going to set that to be image.png, or blank image, isn't it? And when we declare a button, we need to give it an action, otherwise it's not going to basically do anything. So we're going to type in the keyword action, and I'm just going to say null action followed by brackets, just to say that it's not going to do anything when we click on it. And then I'm going to say at, and I'm going to add our transform here, temp trans, control C that, control V. Cool. And then that should produce a image on the screen, but now we have to actually use this screen somewhere else. Now the best place to use this is our say screen, because we currently have the say screen actually being displayed. So we come down here and you can see where our say screen is. We say who, what, style prefix, and all that. What I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to use the use command, use, type in the name of our screen, save it. Now what's going to happen is whenever the say screen is called, it's also going to display our temp screen, because we're saying that the say screen also uses the elements from the temp screen. What I'm also going to do is remove our command here where we actually called that image to be shown, because we're already doing that now with our screen file here. So we're already supposedly putting that on the screen. What I'm also going to do is come back in here, and I have to remember to put this in quotation marks so that it actually knows what button, what image we're going to do. And then we're going to save it, and we're going to see what happens. So we should still be seeing the image on the screen, but obviously there are going to be some differences into how the transform is applied to this button currently, because what we have is a button with nothing in it, but it still has a blank image in it. So what we might be better off doing is changing the background to none, and then adding the image like that instead, and then we can see what happens. And now when we run our code, what you can see is that our button is there. It's doing what we told it to do previously, and it's still spinning. So the transform is now being applied to this as a button instead of an image, which allows us to do some other stuff. So if we come back into our transform here, what we can actually do is we can say on_hover. We don't need an underscore there, sorry, my apologies. And then we can separate that using a colon, and then we can change it so that it does that instead. Now, if I'm right, what we should now get is, if we hover the mouse over it, you can see it's having an effect now. However, what we need to do is we now need to set it to an on or an off hover, or an on unhover, I should say, or on idle. So that as soon as we are back to not hovering on the image, so we can actually set the X zoom to be 1 inside of that, so that whenever we hover off of it, it will reset back to not spinning. So there you go. When I'm hovering my mouse over the button, it spins, and then when I take my mouse away, it snaps back to being full size, which is quite useful. Now, as you can imagine, this is not just, and we don't just have to apply this to kind of a spinning effect. What we could do is have it so that it looks like it's pulsing or growing in size. So what we could do is get rid of the X out of there. And we can say, instead of zoom 1.0, we can just say zoom to 0.9, for example, and then 1.1. So that now when we hover our mouse over our displayable, it just kind of shrinks a bit and grows a little bit like that. And again, we can play around with the ease in and ease out effects so that we can give it different kind of animations. And we can apply different properties. So I'm going to actually swap out the property that we've given it currently, where it says ease in. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to use ease expo, which means ease exponentially, if I remember correctly. Save that, and hopefully it won't crash, he says optimistically. So now we can see that it's sort of doing a exponential acceleration and deceleration at both ends. And there's a website called easings.net, which if you look at it, will show you a graph of what these transforms actually look like. And then you can find on the Ren'Py animation and transforms page what the Ren'Py equivalent description of these transitions actually is. So for example, if I'm looking at the easings website, you can find something that perhaps looks a little bit more wacky. So I could say ease in out quad, for example, is another one. So ease quad would be the equivalent of that. So it's a slightly less steep curve. So we just go quad there, save that, give Ren'Py a chance to refresh. And then as you can see now, that's a slightly less extreme and probably a little bit more aesthetically pleasing pulse animation like that. So what's the point in this? Well, let's have a go at adding some more stuff to our button. So what happens if I was to put some text in there? And we'll just call it button. I'm going to go with a line 0.5, 0.5 inside the button. Save that. And now it's throwing it all wacky. But as you can see, the animation is now actually applying to our text as well. So once you've got your elements all lined up, so if we were to, for example, because this is currently aligned to the center of the screen, not the center of the button, which is what's caused this all to go a little bit bonkers. So if, for example, we was to put a VBox inside our button and save that, let's see what happens now. Now our text is actually inside our button, which is better. And if you remember, we're going back to our previous episode where we looked at screen language. This is where we have to be kind of a little bit clever in what we do. So as you can see, I had to do a little bit of fudgery to get this all to work. And one of our biggest problems is that we're using an image for our background of our button, which was obviously not scaling with the size of the button. So what I've done now is I've come back to my code. I've removed the image file from our button and I've just simply given it a colored background. I've reapplied our anchor of 0.5, 0.5 to my button. I've also given an X align of 0.5 to my VBox, which is what's now centered my text. So if I were to hover over it, you can see now that it's actually scaling from the middle, it's pulsing, the text is aligned in the middle, and the button is the right size because I've actually declared an XY size for my button here. You don't necessarily have to do that. For example, if I were to hash that out and I were to just put perhaps padding in there instead, we could say 10, 10, 10, 10. And as you can see now, the actual button itself will continue to look about right, but it will now scale with the size of the text that I put inside it rather than it being of a fixed size, which had I left the XY size in there, it would have done. So I could say, just put button in there twice, save it, and now when Ren'Py has reloaded, you can see that the button has scaled based on the size of the text within it. Now, there are obviously problems with this when you're creating a user interface, because in a user interface, generally speaking, buttons look better if they're all uniformly sized, but the contents within them are centrally aligned. So, for example, if I had two buttons, which we can very easily do, we can just copy this, paste this in here, and I just give this a slightly different Y position so we know our text. So let's just give this 660 or 640 as our property. So we can now come back in and I'm hovering over that one and you can see that it is growing and shrinking as I hover over it, whereas this one doesn't until I come off of it like so. So nothing too complicated happening there, but if I wanted my bottom button to only contain the word button, as it currently stands, that's going to look like that, which some people may not find aesthetically displeasing, but that bugs me, to be honest. The buttons being different sizes, it just looks disorganized. So at this point, I would probably go back to this kind of formula where our button size is set, and then as you can see the text is now wrapped in this one, so we would have to address the text size of our buttons, but ultimately the buttons are the same size now, which I find a little bit better. And then if we have a look at our options here, we can see that we can adjust these so that we can speed up the way it pulses. We could speed it up to 1 second, for example, so that it pulses a little bit more quickly. I think that that's increasing and decreasing in size a little bit too much. So let's change this to 9.8 and that can be 1.02. Come back to our button again and we should now see that it changes, but not by anywhere near as much, so that that's a little bit less jarring of an animation. But as you can see, the options here are endless, really. You can use any number of things. You can change colors, you can change the opacity, you can change the zoom size, you can, let's say for example, we want to animate as well our alpha property. Let's say alpha, we're going to drop it down to 0.5 and then we'll say alpha 1.0 again here. And now if we come back in, you can see that the button's also going to kind of fade. So we're changing the alpha property of our colors so that it fades in and out as we hover over it, which is pretty cool, you know, and you can apply all kinds of masks to this sort of thing. But definitely get in touch with the Ren'Py animation and transform language page and learn the properties that you can play around with using these transitions over time, because it does make a tremendous amount of difference being able to add these little funky effects to your buttons. You can do it on the main menu if you want to. You could have it so that your menu options hover, when they're hovered over, they do a funky little animation where they grow and shrink and change colors and all those sorts of things. So definitely worth getting into and having a look at what you can achieve with those things. So thanks ever so much for watching that video, guys. I know it was a bit of a short one, but you know, this is one of those topics where I can show you the way, but you really need to get in there and have a bit of a play and experiment with these things and see what you can accomplish, because there are such a huge number of different things that you can do with ATL that it's you know, it would take me weeks to cover it all in terms of content. Now remember, these transforms can be applied to any displayable, so anything that you can put on a screen can have these transforms applied to them. So you can do this with frames, buttons, all kinds of things, okay? So definitely worth getting in there, having a look. Use the Ren'Py documentation where it is available, and if you just search for Ren'Py ATL, it will take you straight to the Ren'Py animation and transforms language page so that you can actually investigate the options that are available to you on there, okay? Thanks very much for watching. Hope you found this one useful. Let me know what you think in the comments below, of course, and I will see you in the next one. But until then, you take damn good care of yourselves, all right? Bye-bye.